Hello everyone, this is Starry Ari's ASMR. I am Ari, and today I have a very different video for you, and this is kind of inspired by a lot of other ASMR videos that I've seen, and specifically I think there's a channel called Rebecca's Beautiful ASMR Addiction, and she's done quite a few, just kind of drive around with her phone, just pointed out the windshield, and you just kind of are along for a drive with her. And there's something about the background noise and just the sound of the car that I think is so relaxing. I've seen quite a few other folks do kind of this style of video as well, so I recently was driving around quite a bit in Washington State, and that's where I live, and I had to travel a bit around the state for a couple of different events, for a friend's wedding, and just kind of going around in different areas. And so I have a little clip on my air vent where my phone, it just gets set so that if I'm looking at the maps, I can really easily see it. And I also realized that I could just set my phone there and have it record while I was driving. So that is what I did. So right now I am just driving along I-90, and I love this pass so much. So I will be driving, you'll see clips from different areas around the state, so these aren't all just from the same day, I just kind of put them together. But I love driving over the mountain passes because I think that they are just so beautiful, and I love the scenery, and the Pacific Northwest is certainly my favorite type of scenery. It's what I grew up with, and even though I've traveled quite a bit to different areas and I can see the beauty in those areas, coming back to the Pacific Northwest, it's just my home. So all the evergreens and the mountain ranges, it's just very comforting to me, and it reminds me of all of those road trips that my family would take when I was younger, because we didn't really go on many big family vacations at all, and so our vacations were usually road trips and camping, and I really loved that as a kid, and so we were frequently driving around in different areas, and that's just kind of what these roads remind me of. But I thought that it was just so beautiful, and it was a little bit hazy because unfortunately we do have some wildfires in the area, kind of also just coming down from Canada, and so we are just experiencing some of that smoke. But I would much rather, deal with smoke than the threat of fire directly, so it's one of those things where I just, I'm very grateful that we're not having to deal with more than just the smoke. But it was still a very beautiful day, and I do want to also apologize for my very dirty windshield. So I did try and clean them a little bit, but there were some spots that are quite stubborn, so I wasn't able to get them until I stopped for gas after filming these clips, and then I was able to take the little squeegee brush that's at the gas stations and clean off my windows. Luckily, it wasn't too bad going anywhere. I think on this drive, I think all of these clips, I don't think there's any traffic. And I mean, compared to some areas, like I've driven around, like the LA area, and I've been in New York City. I've never driven around New York City because I did not want that for myself. But compared to certain areas, there is, like, I think people would laugh if we said that there was traffic around here. It's very minimal, even when there are backups. It's also quite funny because I did have directions going while I was filming these clips, and so I had to cut out a few spots when my little Google Maps lady chimed in about, like, oh, there are police reported ahead, or, there's an accident up ahead to the right, or something like that. So when I was going through and putting these clips together, I was having to take those sections out because I did not think that they were particularly conducive to a nice, relaxing drive. I'm also going to try and leave some nice moments of silence because I think that those are kind of the moments where you tend to fall asleep, when there's kind of breaks in between talking. Now there were quite a lot of semis, which there tend to be on these mountain pass roads, and sometimes the semis are being a little bit dangerous and like going way faster than they should, or passing other semis in the far left lane and having traffic like come to a sudden stop at 60 miles per hour, or even slower if they're going up a hill. But I felt like in these clips, everyone was being pretty reasonable, which is nice. This landscape is just my favorite. It is just so beautiful and green and lush. We're in the middle of summer and still we just have all of our green trees everywhere. You can hear the rattling of my little phone clip, so I apologize if that's distracting, but I don't think it should be too bad. I do have many, many memories of falling asleep in the car when my parents were driving and just kind of sitting. There's just something so relaxing about being in the car and just having that really nice, peaceful, calm background sound. Now, I have traveled lots of the mountain passes in Washington State, and I would say that I tend to prefer going on US 12. I like taking that highway going through White Pass, mainly because I think it's a little bit smaller, and it really kind of depends on which direction or where we're trying to go on, either side of the state. So we can generally kind of plan our trips just based on whatever's going to be fastest. But I think that 90 is quite a bit bigger of a highway. It tends to have more cars, and that can be a good and a bad thing. But I think that going on 12, the scenery, like, you feel like you're like tucked into the mountain a little bit more, and I feel like I really like that feeling, just being really close in with the trees. And it's kind of getting in this area, I think, kind of heading towards Auburn. I think that kind of is that similar feeling. Usually for car rides, we like to listen to music. My husband loves to sing in the car, and if I'm ever driving by myself, I usually like to kind of go between music and a podcast, because I feel like podcasts kind of help keep my focus a little bit better, whereas music can sometimes kind of just almost make me want to like zone out, which obviously when you're driving is like not a good idea. I usually don't really like to speed very much. The most I like to speed is maybe like 5 over, and then I'm like, whoa, okay, that's enough of that. But I am very much like a rule follower. I like to follow the rules, and I am very worried about getting pulled over and getting a ticket, which I've never gotten a ticket, but I am worried about it all the time. And here I did hit a little bit of traffic just because the 2 lanes go down into one, so that second, the lane on the right needed to just kind of zipper merge over. And I am a strong proponent of zipper merging. I think that, it's more effective, but it's only more effective when everyone does it. So it's really frustrating to me when people don't do it, because they have this weird sense that like people are cutting, or I don't know why. I'm just like, yeah, get on over, I always like to try and leave a space for that car, because then we're all just gonna get where we're going faster than if we're constantly having to slam on our brakes because people are doing silly things. I do feel like the main source of traffic in the Pacific Northwest in most places tends to be construction. Famously, areas all around Tacoma on I-5 have been under construction for decades, and it just kind of moves around on I-5. And kind of all along I-5 through the state, there are sections in different areas, different counties where that's kind of the case. And I feel like that tends to be the primary cause of slowdowns. And beyond that, it really isn't bad. People in the state complain about it. But again, having experienced LA traffic and seen some of the traffic on the East Coast, and it we have it so good, and people here just don't know that. And then these clips here are out of the mountain ranges and around the Tacoma area. So at one point you can see the Tacoma Dome off to the right. And that's just kind of the big stadium here. I don't think that this stretch of road is like as visually appealing as the mountain pass roads, just because it's, in a more urban area. I find driving on I-5 pretty easy, kind of all through Tacoma and Seattle. It really isn't that bad at all. I've done the drive like all the way through the state many, many, many times, and it really, like, we're pretty lucky with the I-5 roads up here. And generally, like I said, usually the slowdowns occur when there's, just construction, or things just tend to slow down if lanes are closed, things like that. Sometimes you'll get slowdowns, especially around the base. So there is JBLM just south of Tacoma, and that's a military base, and that does tend to, for some reason, have some construction kind of around it. But even that, or not construction, traffic around it. But in general, I feel like it isn't too bad coming into Tacoma. It really doesn't take very long if you're traveling like up through Tacoma. And then this stretch is south of Tacoma, so this is kind of heading towards Olympia. I really like Olympia. I mean, I like the Pacific Northwest in general. I like a lot of our cities here. But I really enjoy Tacoma and Olympia. Tacoma, I think, is the butt of a lot of jokes, and for good reason. But I think a lot of Seattle folks see anywhere outside of Seattle as like not as good. But I do enjoy visiting. We have family kind of all throughout the state, and so we visit a lot of different places, and it's really easy to like travel around places other than just the distances, and I feel like our roads are generally pretty well kept. But I do really enjoy driving down into Olympia because you can also see the Capitol building from I-5, and I always enjoy being able to see that tiny glimpse of it. And I think a lot of the school kids around the state did field trips because Olympia is the state capital. And so I recall my field trip to the state capital, but it was only a select few students that got to go. And I was one of them, and I was so excited, and it was so fun to go and see all of these big buildings, and going into Olympia was like, going into the big city for us, just growing up in such a rural area. And it was just a really fun experience, and I've just always kind of enjoyed visiting Olympia. I think it has some really, really nice areas. And here you can see the state capitol building, that little dome just off in the distance. I do really enjoy driving. I grew up in a more rural area where we kind of had to drive to access anything. We did not have any public transit at all, so you needed to drive places. And so I just kind of grew up in that culture, and I was so excited to get my driver's license. I had saved up like all of my babysitting money and everything so that I could get my permit as soon as possible. And then the day I turned 16, my dad took me to the DOL, and I got my license literally the day that I could. I was usually the one that would kind of drive our friends around, and I always liked to kind of be the driver also because some of my friends were crazy drivers and I get car sick when other people drive, so I didn't ever really mind being the designated driver. And then these clips were from a different day of driving, and this was through a different pass. So this was going through the pass on Highway 12, and that kind of windy route. And in the winter, this one is a little bit more risky just because it is smaller, so I feel like it isn't plowed as frequently, and there's just, I think it tends to get a little bit more snow. I'm not actually sure about that, but it feels like it gets more snow. So this is not our preferred pass if we ever need to cross for some reason during the winter, which is, it's pretty rare. But I do like this one because I feel like you just really drive right through the foothills of the mountains, and you're just kind of like coming slowly right through them, and it just feels like a very peaceful drive. I think I was filming this when it was a little bit more middle of the day, so you can see my dashboard reflection in my windshield, I think just from the positioning of the sun. And I feel like my windshield looks even dirtier here than it did earlier, so that's not great. It is quite common to see deer and elk on these drives, and you do have to be careful. I thankfully have never hit any animal in my car, but I know a lot of people who have, and it is unfortunately a common occurrence here, and you just generally have to be quite aware. But I have many times seen, big herds of elk or deer hanging out in these fields on either side of the road, and that's always really amazing to see. But it also just kind of reminds you to be a little bit more aware of your surroundings. You can still see the smoke, and it's just a little bit, hazy, which I think is it's something that we kind of unfortunately have been dealing with for like each summer. It's kind of expected, like end of July through August, we kind of expect there to be wildfire smoke and poor air quality. When we go camping during the summer, we usually like to try and find campgrounds in these mountain areas just because they tend to be a little bit cooler in the summer than like off of the mountain. And it's also just usually such a pretty location, so we have done a lot of camping around, Mount Rainier and just like all of the forest areas around that. also feel like going through this route, there are quite a few just really, really cute little towns. And one of my favorite little mountain towns is Packwood, and you pass it when you're going on your way to White Pass. And we've actually done quite a bit of snowboarding at White Pass, and so we would frequently go through Packwood a lot. And I think it is just such a cute little town. And anytime we go this way, we usually like to stop and get a little coffee or get a little lunch or something. It's just like a very, very cute little town. And there's lots of those just kind of sprinkled throughout here. Whereas, again, if I'm coming over back on I-90, I feel like it just feels like a bigger highway, so it doesn't really ever feel like you're going through those small towns. It feels like you're kind of set aside from them, whereas on this route you're like driving right through them. So the speed limit goes down and then it comes right back up for the highway speeds, and then it goes back down for the next town, so you're really having to like slow down and pay attention. And I just feel like they're such cute little towns. And they usually make pretty good rest stops if we are driving with our dog, because sometimes she does get car sick, or we think if we're going across the pass, her ears might get a little bit bothered by the pressure differences. So we do usually like to do a stop just to let her get out, have a little potty break, and take a break from the car. And so I feel like we've stopped in Packwood quite a bit for that purpose. You'll actually see me pulling into one little coffee shop that we like to stop at. But that brings us kind of close to the end of the footage that I had of just driving around a few different times these last couple of weeks. And I just love driving, and I love the beautiful summer weather, and the scenery is just so pretty. But I hope that you enjoyed this video as well, and maybe it was good background ASMR or just some good ambiance that could help you fall asleep. I hope that you enjoyed it. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope that you have a wonderful rest of your day.